Welcome back to the Mina Kimes Show featuring Lenny, the only NFL podcast where one of the hosts hates the idea of trading for a vet because he likes his vet. She gives him treats every time he comes in. That's Lenny. I'm Mina Kimes. And I am joined by the one, the only, the lovely, the host of multiple podcasts, fantasy football podcast, First Draft. It's called First Draft, right? First Draft, which is in full swing right now. That is Field Yates. Field, welcome back.
Yeah, I first of all, I'm like the point guard of that show, but like the point guard that scores 0 points per game. Who is that? Because I'm not trying to be self-deprecating off the jump here, Mina, but what I love about the First Draft show is that I essentially go there and just get Todd and Mel in and out of conversations because they're so passionate about what they do with the draft that 99% of what actually is said during the show, like, it's already been populated in their brain. It's just a matter of like a little bit of direction here.
Well,
so
that might be.
But I love coming to the show.
That might be the case for that show, but you have excellent draft takes, and we were talking about the draft before we started taping. We're not talking about the draft today, however. I'm not yet. I think probably in a couple weeks I'll really start diving into the draft. But we still have things to talk about with free agency, signings, trades. Players are still out there. So I sent you a list of some of the bigger moves and also just some teams that I feel like I haven't really talked about that have done some interesting things this offseason. So I'm excited to dive into all of that with you. This being an ESPN product, however, we are professionally obligated to start with the Dallas Cowboys. I actually really wanted to talk about this move because last week I talked about how much I loved the Stephon Gilmore trade. I feel the same way about the Brandon Cooks trade and Field treetops before we actually get into the player and the value and whatever. Both of these trades are really fascinating to me in conjunction because both of them are areas of very specific need, players that really fill the exact holes on the roster, but they're also veterans who are basically on one-year deals. I mean, the Cooks one, it could last a little longer, but to me, it almost signifies something about the Dallas Cowboys, which is they very much view themselves as a playoff contender and saw an opportunity to get better next year.
So the Cowboys are always fun to talk about because nobody has middle-of-the-road takes on the Dallas Cowboys, right? They're either the most overrated franchise in the NFL or you're on my side of the ledger, which is that they're really close. I know that there are a lot of ways to spin success, but over the past 2 seasons, only the Chiefs have more wins than the Cowboys. Like, this is not some woebegone franchise. This is a team that, in a sport in which we don't play 7-game series in the playoffs, has choked on big stages. And when your owner is Jerry Jones and you have the history of the Dallas Cowboys and you have a quarterback who can be divisive because some weeks he's great and then he leads the NFL or is tied for the lead in interceptions, that's what happens. And as you know, at our network, we talk about it all the time. The Cowboys are really close. They were really close last year. They just didn't perform when they needed to in a big moment. But let's get to a couple of things that you already mentioned. On principle, you and I, we talked about this before. We are fans for veteran player trades during the offseason, specifically the type that the Cowboys have executed twice in a week. The draft capital is extremely modest, much less than the fans would have guessed Stephon Gilmore would be worth in a trade. But not only is it a modest trade parameters that you are engaging in the other team with, but also the compensation is like a fixed cost. You know exactly what you are owing these players for however long they're under contract for. And this is getting deep into the weeds, but when you are acquiring a player in a trade from a different team, you do not take on the signing bonus proration of that player's contract from whoever signed him to that contract before. So while the Colts on their cap this year still have a portion of Stephon Gilmore's signing bonus that they signed or they gave him last year, the Cowboys only inherited the actual base salary plus the incentives plus the roster bonuses, which makes it a much more modest cost. It's like a $10 million proposition basically for Stephon Gilmore. And in the case of Brandon Cooks, I'm sure you probably saw this, but in case people listening or watching didn't see this, not only did they acquire Brandon Cooks after the Texans paid $6 million of his salary for this year, But the Cowboys subsequently agreed to another restructured contract with Brandon Cooks that brings the total value over the next 2 years to $20 million. That's $10 million for the Cowboys for Brandon Cooks this year and next, and $10 million for the Cowboys for Stephon Gilmore. That's better than any free agent deal they could have gone out and signed on the open market when competition dramatically inflates price points.
Yeah, the value is great. I mean, you alluded to the Texans eating some of his contract. We should also note the Cowboys tried to trade for Brandon Cooks mid-season, offered more. Yeah. I think it was like a third or something, Field, you might remember.
Yeah, much more, yeah.
And maybe you can explain why Brandon Cooks has been traded as much as he has, because I actually think it's just like one of those things that
perfect,
literally wrong place, wrong time for this dude. Yep. So many points. Because the reason why it's a mystery, you often when there's plays like that, you do hear like, oh, maybe there's an injury issue. Maybe he's not well liked. None of that applies to Brandon Cooks. Everybody likes Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks has been a good player, for a very, very long time. It literally is just teams and situation and randomness with him. But
you have to go break it down one by one, and we could spend 10 minutes. But I'm here to tell you, there's not like
nothing's wrong with Brandon Cooks. Yeah,
he's a very, very solid player who's deserving of that number 2 spot in Dallas.
Yes. Yeah, so and then I love the value of these trades. I love their approach. I love the timeline. I love how it doesn't constrict them for the future at all. But most importantly, Field, I love the fit of the player with this team, because I argued a lot last year that this Dallas Cowboys offense did not have enough separation. This was actually, to me, a big part of the reason why Dak Prescott threw so many interceptions. He had the highest, I talked about this endlessly, highest tight window throw rate in the NFL. Now, some of that is because Dak Prescott loves throwing tight window throws up the seams, but some of it is because his wide receivers do not separate that much. And we had a stat on NFL Live that our researcher Henry gave me that Brandon Cooks he's not what he was 4 years ago, but he had as many 30-yard catches last year in like 13 games as the entire Cowboys roster. What he brings to this offense is speed, separation. You move, CD gets to play in the slot full time, which is the best spot for him. It creates space for him. Michael Gallup slides back to that number 3 role, which is where he thrived with Amari Cooper. And suddenly, in the grand words of Radiohead, everything is in its right place. So from a football standpoint, I think it's exactly what they needed for this offense, and I absolutely love it.
If you saw Brandon Cooks standing next to CeeDee Lamb, by conventional wisdom, you would think that Cooks is the slot and CeeDee Lamb is the perimeter receiver, when the reality is that Cooks is a small guy who plays better on the perimeter, and Lamb is a bigger guy, at least relative to Cooks, who plays at his best in the slot. And we can dive into this a million different ways, but just look at what they do in Los Angeles with Cooper Kupp and, to a degree, Justin Jefferson and Tyreek Hill during his Kansas City days. There's just so much more.
Things are so different now with slot. Like the slot teams view it so differently now.
You're not going to see, if whoever you believe the best cornerback is in the NFL right now, whoever you believe that is, you are very unlikely to see that player play 100% of his snaps in the slot. That's just not how teams are going to deploy these top cornerbacks, because there's just, I'll say the simple version is that they're playing in traffic in the slot, and they're not playing in traffic on the perimeter. And it's a lot easier for a guy, for anybody, any human. Like, would you rather walk across the street with no traffic or lots of traffic? The answer, obviously, is with no traffic. So I think it's a smart move by the Cowboys that allows them to get their best player on offense, or at least their best receiver on offense, into the spot where he can most consistently stress the defense.
So you alluded to the restructuring. Cowboys have a little money right now. I do think this takes them out of the OBJ sweepstakes. That would be, I mean, you never know with Jerry. That would be pretty surprising to me. But they have some money to play with, and there are still needs on this roster. I would say, so I should mention somebody that, they traded for Gilmore. They traded for Cooks, of course. But they also brought back guys, Donovan Wilson, safety, Leighton Vander Esch, linebacker, Tyron Smith. I think those are the big names that come to mind.
And they most recently, like, if these things move the needle for you at all, Ronald Jones was signed to, I think, a 1-year deal. And then Dante Fowler Jr., was retained on a one-year deal as well. Fowler
Yeah.
Jr. obviously very familiar with Dan Quinn. They've had a relationship dating back to their Florida days and played pretty well for them last year. He gives them some juice off the edge, which you need because as great as Micah Parsons is as a rusher, he's not always going to rush.
Yeah. It's a pretty deep roster right now, honestly.
Yeah.
I think going into the draft, I probably will do team needs next week, and I'll talk about every team, but just kind of thinking about these additions and how things fit together. You and I were talking a little bit before about how our colleague Dan Orlovsky on NFL Live talked about Bijan Robinson. He talked about trading out for Bijan Robinson. I would not do that. 26, it gets interesting, especially with Pollard being on a one-year deal and Ronald Jones on a one-year deal as well. But I will say, this is a Cowboys team that can always get better in the trenches. And if I would say that's where I would look. Defensive tackle seems like never-ending issue with them. Stopping the run on the inside. The offensive line, they brought back Tyron Smith, but he's obviously getting up in the years. So that's another thing. And then another position I would watch out for, tight end. They need a tight end. Dalton Schultz is gone. A lot of great tight ends in this draft. So that's another thing that I would look for.
Yeah, they got reasonable production when Schultz was gone, and they found two players, an undrafted and then a drafted tight end. Peyton Hendershot, probably the name that registered more for the casual fan for the Cowboys. They got some production there at the tight end spot, but I think one of the realities for these rosters that have top-heavy contracts, and the Cowboys are one of them because Dak makes a lot of money, and it won't be long before CeeDee Lamb's making a ton of money. Micah Parsons is making earth-shattering money, right? Whatever the number you think it is, it's probably more than that. And say with Trevon Diggs, as one of the realities is when you have these kind of rosters, the 49ers are a good example of this. The Rams, during their heyday, were a good example of this. But you got to pay down some spots.
Yeah.
The Chiefs are a good example. The lifeline of these teams will always be, the lifeblood will be, can they draft and fill holes? Can they plug gaps there? But I think the offensive line is the most interesting one that you mentioned there, Mina, for this reason. You talked about Tyron Smith. He came back on a restructured contract. First time. He signed a 10-year extension way back in the day.
It's one of the best bargains, but then he's been hurt, so it's kind of complicated.
Unbelievable bargain over the life of that contract. But now he's coming back on a dramatically reduced contract. That suggests that even though he's back for this year, his days are probably, I don't think we expect 5 more years of Tyron Smith playing at a high level. Terrence Steele, right tackle, restricted free agent. He got the tender. So as of right now, under contract for just one more season. And I know that they did obviously draft Tyler Smith last year. He's going to be a long-term fixture at one of these spots, but can never have enough depth there at offensive line. They lost Connor McGovern, one of the two Connor McGoverns.
Both free agents at the same time, right? Very irritating.
Very irritating. And then Zach Martin, who's incredible. He may actually defy age forever, but he is getting, he's a 2014 draft pick. So, excuse me, that's 10 years in to his career. At some point, these players are going to not be exactly what they have been for the vast majority of their career.
I think it's a good point. The Cowboys, if you look at their last 4 years, I was kind of pulling up the draft history. They have had a lot of hits. Tyler Smith appears to be a hit. I would say Deron Bland, slot cornerback that they drafted last year in the 5th round, really contributed for them down the stretch. The year before, you have Micah Parsons. The mix of players, you're a little bit less, some defensive tackles, some questions. And then you have Lamb and Diggs in that next draft, along with Biotish, who's their center. So there's, and then before that was McGovern and Pollard and Donovan Wilson. So point is, they have drafted players who become core pieces of this team, but that has to continue, to your point, because of the stars and because those players will be, now that they got to pay them. So Cowboys, well done. We liked your offseason. Good job. A+.
Shining stars so far. Yes.
Okay. So we're talking a little bit about the running backs. It's been an interesting offseason for the running backs because it feels like kind of, have you ever seen that video where everyone's kind of switching marbles or, I don't know, on a table? I don't know, whatever. But the point is, so many of them switch places. Fantasy is going to be so confusing next year because it feels like so many rookie running backs coming off their deals switch teams. There is one that I wanted to talk to you about in particular. It was a signing that happened, I think, yesterday. The Bills adding Damien Harris. I think this is really interesting because Devin Singletary left and signed with the Texans, who we're going to talk about, by the way, after the break, Texans fans. His year, it was like a 1 year, pretty cheap deal, like under $4 million. Have the Harris numbers come out yet? But it's also a 1 year deal, right?
Yeah, and when the numbers haven't come out yet, Mina, it means it's probably like average or below what you'd expect it to be. That's just how contracts work.
So probably similar, right?
Yeah, maybe even less.
Which is interesting because essentially that's kind of why I find this so interesting, because the Bills, I think people think of them as having like this terrible rushing attack because we look for weaknesses with the Bills, and that is just a thing to point to. The reality is it hasn't been that bad. Last year, they finished second in passing DVOA, but 11th in rushing. And Devin Singletary, I was comparing Harris and him. There's numbers where Harris looks better. There's numbers where Singletary looks better, but context matters obviously so much for running backs. But I think there's been a sentiment for a long time that the Bills want to run the ball better and should be able to run the ball better because they should be able to, getting light boxes. And they obviously, with Singletary leaving, they still had Nyheim Hines and James Cook, but those are more like scat back types. They needed that every down bell cow back. So my question for you is, do you think this was smart? Do you think Damien Harris brings something to the table that maybe Singletary didn't? And why do you think that they chose him in particular?
I'm no Doug Kazarian, but I would, if there was a place that I could find that has like significant odds that, like if Damien Harris is probably like, I don't know, plus 3,500 to lead the NFL in rushing touchdowns next year.
Yeah.
I'd mess around with that.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Because 2 years ago, he had 15 rushing touchdowns. I think he was tied for the NFL lead in rushing touchdowns in 2021. You've talked about all these backs that Buffalo has had. The common thread amongst them is that they are not hammerheads, which is kind of exactly what Damien Harris is. His skill set's fairly narrow, right? Like, not going to do much in the passing game. Haven't seen a bunch of different styles of running from Damien Harris. But, the Patriots last year did very few things very well. But in prior years when they were doing things well, one of the things they've always done a good job of is they just mash in the running game, right? Whether it's David Andrews, Shaq Mason, guys that have either been there, are still there, whoever it is, Trent Brown, Cole Strange, like those guys they put hands on bodies and they can move some people around. And Damien Harris is see hole, hit hole. That's the kind of runner he is. It has a lot of value for Buffalo because they're going to be in the red zone a lot because they have a very good offense. They need somebody that can get some like yards that go beyond what you are able to block for, right? That's the measure of a good running back, is not what he gets based off of how the offensive line blocks, but what he gets beyond that. Third thing I'll mention, I know that Josh Allen is a cyborg. At some point, though, you have to be mindful of the hits he is taking. That's just the reality of any quarterback, whether it's the very best ever to run, in my opinion, in Lamar, or whether it's a guy in Josh Allen who is awesome at running. But you have to protect him. Like, these guys are not, like, it just takes one hit to change the course of your season. And your window it's not closing anytime soon. But you play in the AFC.
Yeah.
Like, you can't afford to throw these years away.
And I mean, Cam Newton is right there is the cautionary tale when it comes to using a quarterback the way the Bills have at times used Josh Allen. I actually think it probably needs to get brought up more. I always joke that the Bills' break in case of emergency play is just quarterback draw. But it really is, Field. And towards the end, and because of Josh's style is similar to Cam's. It's not like Lamar where he's evasive and he's hard to bring down. Like, he seeks out contact and he's huge. But at a certain point, when you play that position and you're that good at it, it is not a good idea to have your quarterback take that much contact. And I think that, to go back to the beginning, why are we always so obsessed with the Bills' run game or lack thereof? That is a big part of it because Bills fans don't want their quarterback to be the leading ball carrier at the end of games. They want a running back they can count on. By the way, you talked about getting yards beyond what the offensive line is blocking for. So Damien Harris, last year, the previous year was a better year, obviously, but last year he still finished 12th in the NFL in the percentage of runs where Next Gen Stats has this. He gained over the expected yardage. And he finished 7th in DVOA, which accounts for opponent and situation. So advanced numbers do like his production a lot, which would seem to bode well for Buffalo.
3 last things. One, it's always easy for us to tell these quarterbacks, like, either don't run or be smarter as a runner. Okay, Josh Allen last year had like a totally jacked up elbow, and like a quarter later went and made like a sprawling tackle attempt that looked like he was going to decapitate himself, right? Like,
so upsetting.
It sounds good to tell these guys to chill out. It's a lot easier for them to actually chill out. 2, Damien Harris. I don't know that this is always a good way to go about things, but NFL teams love players that have crushed them in the past. Damien Harris has played. He's had a couple of vulnerable moments too. But Damien Harris in that game 2 years ago, Monday Night Football, had the long run against the Bills. Like, he's had some good moments against Buffalo. And 3, he's got a ton to prove, Mina, because he entered a contract year last year and had a substandard year and also was hurt. He understands. He's smart enough to know that, like, you get one chance to get a big contract as a running back in 90% of the cases. If he goes to Buffalo and has 900 rushing yards and 12 rushing touchdowns, this could be like a James Conner situation in Arizona, where he parlays one really good year into a very strong contract. If he doesn't, then we will be discussing journeyman Damien Harris for a while. And who would have thought that 2 years ago when he had, I keep saying 15. If it was actually 16, my apologies.
It was a lot.
15 rushing touchdowns in 2021.
Yeah. God, he's going to vulture so many this year. It's going to be infuriating for
Josh Allen stuck down in fantasy.
Before we move on to the next topic, though, just from a fantasy perspective, so I play Dynasty. One of the many moves that delighted me was my guy Miles Sanders going to Carolina, which I think is a great destination for a running back. We saw that the backs there were able to continue their production after McCaffrey was traded, in part because I think this is an ascendant offensive line. Of all the moves, like, which do you think the Dynasty owners are the happiest about of all these running backs switching homes?
Well, I'll give you 2, and they tie into each other. One would be Rashad Penny going to Philly. Your Rashad Penny, your former Seahawk Rashad Penny, because Philly's offense is tailor-made for somebody to go out there and just...
Yes. Don't get me wrong. I was sad that Miles Sanders was leaving Philly, but I was happy that he ended up in Carolina. Could have been worse.
But there's so much opportunity there. An offensive line that should bring back 4 out of 5 starters. Isaac Seumalo went to Pittsburgh in free agency. That would be one that comes to mind. And it ties into also Ken Walker III, because Seattle up to this point has not added anybody. They've lost 2 running backs in free agency. Travis Homer also went to Chicago on a multi-year deal. So the stars are aligning for Ken Walker to continue what started once Rashad Penny got hurt last year, which is a chance to be, I hate to put a certain window on these running backs because, 5 years is an eternity as a running back. But Ken Walker III has immediately become one of the most valuable dynasty running backs at the position, because there are just so few guys that have his blend of skill plus age plus opportunity. And not that I think we expected Rashad Penny to return to Seattle, but the fact that he didn't return, coupled with the fact that unless I've missed something in the last 20 minutes,
they haven't signed.
They have not signed anybody at the running back spot. So I checked my phone on that one.
No,
so you're good. You're good if you're Ken Walker III. Yeah, you probably already know about these signings.
No, it's got me increasingly worried that they're going to draft one. By the way, but that's neither here nor there. This is actually a good segue because I think another player who fantasy owners are probably excited about is David Montgomery, dynasty owners, because landing in Detroit, which we know is a great place to run the football. And I say this as a segue because I want to talk to you about the Lions, who I have somehow resisted talking about, even though I love talking about the Lions. I'm basically like a Lions fan. If not, they're probably my second NFL team now. This goes back before even the end of last season, which was incredible. But so they add David Montgomery, and they bring back some guys. And I want to talk about the defense, because this team clearly went into this offseason saying we have to fix our pass defense. It started when they were in the mix for Jalen Ramsey. Don't know what they offered, but it's been reported that they were in the mix. So once we heard that, they are committed to addressing this. Yep. So by the end of it, they had signed Cam Sutton out of Pittsburgh to a 3-year deal. Emmanuel Mosley, who was a cornerback with the San Francisco 49ers, who was good when he was healthy. He was hurt last year. I think
love that one.
Because of that, got him on a 1-year, $6 million prove-it deal.
Yep.
And then, in a signing that shocked a lot of people, and I want to talk to you about the shock element later, but first I just kind of want to focus on the football side of it. C.J. Gardner-Johnson, who many viewed as one of the best defensive backs available in free agency, plays in the slot, played safety for Philadelphia after being sent there. 1 year, $8 million. So let's just start with this remade Lions pass defense. How do you view all of these players meshing together? Do you like the signings? How do you think this is going to be a vastly improved Lions secondary?
So one of the things that I feel like is always tough for us that don't know what the call was or things that are taking place on the field is we often like assign the wrong blame when we're watching pass defense.
Yeah,
like,
I'm always afraid to blame someone in pass defense for this exact reason. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, like so-and-so blew a coverage, and it's like, well, he actually didn't. Like the safety just decided to run right as opposed to left or whatever, right? That's dumbing it down a little bit. But I recall last year when the Lions early in their season were talking about we're in a rut, and Dan Campbell talking about how just like sometimes on defense, like we just got to like execute what we're doing better. We got to like communicate better. We got to get guys on the same page, like rowing the same direction right now. And they haven't, unless again I've missed something different. Like there's not like a free safety who they have added so far in free agency. CJ Gardner-Johnson is kind of a hybrid, right? Mm-hmm. Like has slot presence, certainly can hit you in the running game, has some on-ball production as a safety as well. But it wasn't like a Jesse Bates. So like the minute you sign Jesse Bates, you expect him to become the quarterback of your defense. Yeah. But there should be so much better in just having guys on the same page right now. If most people who are football nerds already know a lot about Emmanuel Moseley, but if you don't, I'm telling you, so fun to go back and watch this player before he got hurt last year and even the years prior to that in San Francisco. I don't know what his exact height and weight is. He thinks he's Patrick Willis in the running game. He like just goes up there and it's like a left tackle and he's like, yes, I'll meet you. It's a wide receiver. It's like, don't even bother trying to block me. Fearless as all get out as a run defender and very, very good in the passing game as well. Cam Sutton, one of the ascendant players over the past 2 seasons for Pittsburgh. I think they're going to play a different style of defense in Detroit than Pittsburgh did in some ways, but like just rock solid. And that price point, Mina, like around $11 million max per year, like that's reflective of a guy who has a lot of upside, but you're not paying, like, the top cornerbacks are getting 18, 20, $21 million in free agency. Like, not as much risk on the team side as well. And the scary part about Detroit, if you're a fan of a different team in that division, is that the card that they still have left to play to make this secondary that much better might be the most valuable cards. And that's the draft. They have 2 picks in the top 18.
Crazy, yeah. 6
and number 18 overall. And long ways to go between now and the draft. There's still 37 days if my math is correct. But I love the top 3 quarterbacks.
This gives
the
them
top 3 quarterbacks. I love them.
So much optionality there, right? Because
totally.
We like a lot of these cornerbacks. We like Devin Witherspoon. We like Christian Gonzalez. I've been talking about them but would you take them at 6? I don't know. That's a whole separate conversation. But now they don't have to. And I think they can. They might. They might trade down a little bit and take one. Who knows? But this is still a team that needs help up front. The front 7, I think, is still not quite there. So they might address that instead. You know what I mean? But the point is, by signing all of these incredibly capable veterans, they just have options now with those very lucrative draft picks. I think just like the GM Brad Holmes, who last year I talked about how much he killed it. I think he's just put his team in a great position headed into the draft with these very low cost signings. And as far as the actual players and their fit on this team, the defense, it's not exactly like with Matt Patricia, where he was basically just like throwing them out to the wolves, but they do play a lot of man coverage, second most in the NFL last year. They do use a ton of nickel, 4th most in the league last season. They needed bodies. And Aaron Glenn, who of course knows CJ Gardner-Johnson from his days with the Saints, I think Detroit and New Orleans play either. Well, I know New Orleans plays the most cover 2 man. I think Detroit is right up there as well. He knows how he fits in to this defense. And he knows that if Tracy Walker is still hurt coming off the injury, that CJ can play in the slot. It just feels like very calculated. It doesn't feel like a team just taking wild swings at players. It feels like a team that went into this offseason with a very clear weakness and a very good plan to address that doesn't come with a lot of financial risk. So, yeah, I think I'm all in on the Lions right now.
how often can a team be calculated while also being opportunistic? Because I don't think they went into the offseason, or at least after 2 or 3 days, thought like, all right, we're getting TJ Gardner-Johnson, because he was just sitting there for the taking. And I think that what ended up happening, and there's been reporting on both sides of this, is that like the market was just not there. What's like I think we both probably like Gardner-Johnson as a player a lot. I think probably public perception got a little bit out of whack about how.
If you lead the league in interceptions, that's what happens. It's like
exactly, right? Yeah. And like, I hate to be this guy, but like, I went back and watched all of his picks from last year. Picks are picks, right? But it's like, not all picks are created equally, though, right? Like, so anyways, my point is that like, the idea that he was going to become a $15 million per year safety was much more fiction than fact, I think, right now. But when the price drops to a maximum value of $8 million, like, you can't sprint fast enough to the phone to call the agent and say, like, this is done, right? So it was a very interesting ability, a very, I would say, tactical week for the Lions to go from having a clear plan early in free agency, being able to react to how the market played out later in free agency, while also continuing to enhance what was your weakest area in prior years. Tracy Walker, certainly very, very good player, but they had a lot of young guys in that secondary as well last year that just like having extra veterans around goes so far in this process.
Yeah, to that point, I'll be very curious to see what these signings mean for Jerry Jacobs, Jeff Okudah. Okudah, was talked about him a lot. Dominique loved him as a draft pick, then had the injuries, and then, Matt Patricia. And I don't think we know exactly. It'll be interesting to see where he fits into the defense with these additions. I don't think we really know. I think maybe they don't know. Honestly, this might be a thing that plays out over the course of the summer, but they have a lot of options, and that's what's so great about this. I do want to talk to you, though, about the news break. You look concerned.
No, I'm just looking at my group chat. I'm like, what are people sending me right now?
Okay, I was like, oh God, did something happen? Was Aaron Donald traded?
No, you're not. You're good.
I did want to talk to you though. This feels like a great place to talk about kind of the market generally before we take a break and get back to some teams, because
Bill
Barnwell and I kind of got into this on his podcast because we were looking at deals. So Bill Barnwell, who's the wonderful Bill Barnwell, grades deals usually. I don't think he did this last year, but we were talking.
Not this year, no.
Yeah, but he gets a lot of guff for being a very harsh grader. And him and I were laughing because we were like, not a lot of bad grades to be given out, because most of the deals handed out this offseason were incredibly reasonable. And many came in lower than people expect. We're going to talk about a couple of them actually in the next half of this podcast. So I guess I'm really glad to have you on to ask you about this, because you're someone who actually talks a lot to teams and agents and has a good sense of like why have you heard any prevailing explanation for this?
Here's the reality: was not a great free agency class. The best player available in free agency was Javon Hargrave from the Eagles,
who signed a big deal
at the time. The Eagles, who did get a big deal, right? But just like, I remember looking at free agency boards and thinking about the wide receiver class, because there was so much talk during the early portion of the offseason. Every conversation I had at the combine was, how are these wide receivers going to shake out? And it'd be like, a lot of people would say, I think Jacoby Myers is the best, or Juju Smith-Schuster is the best available wide receiver. And I'm not including OBJ in this conversation because of the injury. And then I'd be like, okay, like both solid players. And I'd be like, wait, I'd go to like people's top 100 rankings. It'd be like, Jacoby Myers is the 6th best free agent. And I'd be like, wait, a guy who's never had 900 yards or whatever, 1,000 yards in a season is the 6th best free agent available? How is that possible? So I think that's one byproduct of it. 2 is that I think that there were a couple players available at spots, and I don't want to spoil this all because we'll talk about it more later on in the show, but just like positions in the past that have not fared well in free agency. And when I say not fared well, I mean that the deals that have been signed in free agency have aged so poorly that there is scar tissue around the NFL and more sensibility about signing players at those spots. I think those things have contributed to why free agency this year felt so responsible. I don't want to put you on the spot, Mina, but is there a single... I have like 2 total, really kind of 1. But is there a contract that you saw that you were like, whoa, really?
Wait, who was Bill and I were? It was a tight end.
I think we have the same one.
Josh Oliver.
Josh Oliver.
Yeah.
Yes, it's the only one.
We were like, what?
It's the only one.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the only
we like
one.
A lot of
it really is
things
the only one
that this team did. So I don't want to.
3 years, $21 million.
We were just that was surprising, just because of his production.
He's a blocking tight end, and no one cares about those, right? He's a very, very good blocker. But this is a guy who was like a castaway from the Jaguars, right? Like I think he was traded for like a 7th round pick to Baltimore, right? A guy who came out of college, like major athlete, and then all of a sudden it's like he's a blocking tight end. Some
of the running back contracts came in a little higher than what I would personally pay for a veteran running back, especially given how many were available in the draft. Nothing crazy though. Nothing like,
There was really that was the only, and by the way, I don't want to make this like, dog on Josh Oliver hour because he deserved this contract. And by the way, I always love players getting paid, right?
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, when you look at the contracts that have been signed over the past, whatever it is, 8 days since we started free agency, his is the one that, like, if I had to project what they were going to make prior to free agency, I would have been like, oh, good for him. He got the bag. Like, his agent, you deserve, if standard rate is 3, like, you get 4% of that contract because it was a really good job.
Does Daniel Jones count?
Well, that one's a whole different kettle of fish. That's a whole podcast worth of conversation. Yeah.
That's a big contract.
but they're really like, I was impressed by the responsibility of teams this year.
Yeah.
And I think the other reality, Mina, is that I was looking back through, I was just kind of curious what the news cycle was hot on around this time of the year last year, because I felt like it's been a quiet 3 days so far.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what happened to everything? Like last year at this time, I'm pretty sure it was like Tyreek Hill and Devontae Adams trades. Deshaun Watson got traded late in the week during the start of free agency. I'm like, that stuff, like there's nothing that's on our radar right now. This could change with one Adam Schefter tweet that is going to like change the actual like that's going to change the landscape of the NFL.
There's a guy,
right? Like
I do want to ask you about, but I'm going to wait till the end to ask you about him.
Okay.
Who?
Good. Yeah.
A very, very good player who is rumored to be traded soon. So
I can't wait already.
But I think your explanation is really good. Like the combination of the actual players. I remember when Greg Rosenthal kind of put out his list. He does a great list of the top.
He's
free agents.
So good. Love Greg.
And I was looking at it, I was like, I mean, Hargrave was the one that immediately leapt off the page. But wide receivers, tight end, the tight end and safety position, as we were talking about, clearly has just been devalued, except for Josh Allen.
I could make totally. I can make a case truly beyond Javon Hargrave. There was pretty much every player on Greg or Matt Bowen's list that I could say, like, some of it depends. Orlando Brown got $16 million per year, Mina.
All right.
I don't want to talk about it later.
That's a good moment to hit pause because we're going to actually talk about Orlando Brown and the team that acquired him right after this break. Your very first bet with Caesars Sportsbook. It's on Caesars. Just sign up with promo code OMAHAFULL, then place your first bet. If you win, great. You keep your winnings. But if your first bet loses, you'll receive your stake back as a bonus bet. Okay. So, Bengals.
Let's do
Pretty
it.
quiet in free agency. You bring back Jermaine Pratt on a super reasonable deal. Good player.
Yep.
They signed Cody Ford. He's a guard, not a lot. Later on, they get Nick Scott, which we can talk about that in a second when we talk about the defense and some of the losses there.
Yep.
Quiet. Then, bam! They go out, and I was shocked. Nobody looked at the Bengals and thought left tackle is where this team is going to go.
Yeah.
They signed Orlando Brown. So you talked about the money. I think it's worth putting in context. The Chiefs, Orlando Brown's old team, signed Juwan Taylor to $80 million over 4 years. Mike McGlinchey, former right tackle of the San Francisco 49ers, goes to Denver and gets nearly $90 million over 5 years.
87.5,
yeah. Oh, Field. And then Orlando Brown, who I think the vast majority of people would put in above those players, at least the feeling, he plays left tackle, he's played left tackle, he's played it well, comes in at 4 years and $64 million, which before we get to the player, the fit, the team, seems like quite a bargain for Cincinnati.
It does. I want to start with one I want to preface whatever we talk about right now with one thing, which is that when we say things about a player that are perceived as potentially like negative, it's not like, this is not personal. It's just like using the context of other things that have taken place around the league. How does this stack up? And the reality is that if I'm evaluating the most team-friendly contracts signed over the past 8 days at a premium position to land a player for an average of $16 million per year, which includes a total cash payment in years 2 and 3 of $15 million. $15 million in a 2-year span of cash in his pocket. It's the team-friendliest deal by far in the entire exercise, Mina. And it's even Orlando Brown, like his market was less robust than I think some would have guessed, because you hear 4 straight Pro Bowls at left tackle. How could you not want to pursue this guy? He's got a certain style to him, Mina. He is the kind of guy that he puts his hands on you and it's over for you, right? But if you're Von Miller, guys like Josh Sweat that can bend the edge and get around him, you can make life tough on Orlando Brown. And by the way, Mina, it's telling that if he was willing to accept this deal, I know the Chiefs had to pivot quickly to get Jawan Taylor, but he was probably offered more by Kansas City and turned it down. Like, I'm happy that he's going to play for a great franchise, and $64 million is generational altering money. He's got an incredible story. His father, was one of the great hidden gems of the past 30 years in the NFL. An unbelievable story as well. But from a strictly football business standpoint, there were other players who fared much better over the past week than Orlando Brown did.
It's a great deal for Cincinnati. And I really liked it because, Cincinnati is a team that, not too dissimilar from Kansas City, looked at their offensive line, said never again, invested a ton. Yeah. But, Jonah Williams, it was, 13th overall, if I remember correctly?
11th
out
of 13th,
of Alabama.
Yeah. Yep.
He was at least competent for them. And then last year he struggled a lot. Tough. And there were injuries, and whatnot. But I think Orlando Brown is a better player, even with the caveats. He's an interesting player because he's kind of divisive amongst the offensive line community. And I think that divisiveness is probably reflected in Kansas City's decision to move on. If he was a slam dunk, he would still be a Kansas City Chief probably. But I still think he is at minimum above average left tackle to me.
Totally.
I also think, by the way, it's probably easier to play left tackle for Joe Burrow than it is for Patrick Mahomes for a litany of stylistic reasons. So I love that they upgraded when it didn't seem like they had to, or that they even would, because of his availability and his value. Now, it puts them in an interesting position because Jonah Williams, who played right tackle his freshman year at Alabama, if I remember correctly, does not want to play right tackle. He wants to be traded. And so suddenly, you plug one hole, potentially you create another. They have a lot of players who play right tackle. I don't think any of them particularly at a high level based on what we've seen over the last couple of years. That's a position they might target in the draft. And we'll see what kind of... Well, I actually can ask you about that, what they might get for Jonah Williams. But I still, to lock down a player like a competent left tackle at that price for 4 years, especially ahead of what is going to be, an absolute thunderstorm of signing for Cincinnati, I think it's a great, great move for the franchise. And you get a chance to, these teams don't like each other. So, one of the burgeoning rivalries.
Yeah. You may have made Kansas City more vulnerable. Now, it sounds like Jawan Taylor is going to play some left tackle, if not exclusively for Kansas City. That's at least going to be part of their plans. And they may view it as getting a comparable player, maybe even a slight upgrade. Jawan Taylor, he's a very adept pass protector, not quite as strong in the running game. But he can, I think, fit in well there in Kansas City. But yeah, I thought it was a masterstroke. And I read an article, I'm almost positive it was Jay Harrison on the, Jay Morris needs to be on The Athletic, who does a great job covering the Bengals. And it was basically like a blow by blow of how this all came together. And it was like Orlando Brown Jr. goes from like one of those guys that you watch on tape because you want to watch every player. And then it's like, by Wednesday, it was like, excuse me? Like,
he's on our team, yeah.
Did you say we can actually sign this guy? I think it was Tuesday night because Orlando was at ESPN last Tuesday without a deal. And then by Tuesday night at like 10:30, it was like he had a deal. And it was like, wait, this guy could be on our team? Like, it was one of those things that was so far off their radar because I don't think it's much of a stretch to imagine that they didn't think the market for Orlando Brown Jr. was going to be 4 years, $64 million. They probably thought it was going to be 6 years and $120 million, which is a tough stretch for a team that, as you mentioned, has the bill coming due very soon, if not right now, on Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and a bunch of other players that are either players they drafted or guys that are going to be our veteran free agents they've signed who are coming close to the end of their deal. They had to make some tough decisions this offseason, losing Von Bell, losing, of course, Jesse Bates. That's Cincinnati's reality going forward. Their ability to sustain is not going to be, it's Joe Burrow, obviously, but it's making the right choices on the difficult ones.
And they need draft picks to hit, which is, of course, true of any team with a big quarterback salary, and it's going to be I mean, I have yet to be convinced they can fit both Higgins and Chase on this team. I know I've heard both ways. I'm going to, that one I'm going to sit out for now.
I think that's a very
it's tough, man. Yeah. And if you do so, buddy, the rest of your roster. But, we know they're going to at least keep Burrow and Chase at minimum. And in doing so, they do need draft picks to hit. This is a team that is losing. They lost talent on defense. You alluded to both the safeties. Eli Apple's still a free agent. They're counting. They probably bring him back at a cheap price based on where things are going. Awuzie should be back from injury, but you need Daxton Hill to be a starter. You need a lot of the younger players. I mean, Cam Taylor-Britt played some last year and played well.
Well down the stretch, yeah.
Yeah, they just need these young players to play well. And, Lou Anarumo is one of the better defensive coaches in football. Yeah. And if they trade Jonah Williams, I don't know what kind of value they would get for him.
I can't imagine it's much, Mina. We're not talking about
especially
a
at this
second
point.
round pick. Yeah, we're talking the internal leverage you have is actually not that much, right? Like, we're trading this guy because he's going to be on the bench if we don't trade him, right?
Right. So I would like that for a lot of teams if it's like a low cost trade team.
I could see like a 4th round pick getting the job done.
Because there are teams that could certainly use competent left tackle.
Yeah.
So, anyways, it's interesting. It's definitely like, I don't think Cincinnati went into this offseason thinking we're gonna upgrade at left tackle, but they did.
Yeah. I
like it for them. Still, life is still going to be very complicated for the Bengals in the coming months and years.
It's good
another
problems,
team,
though, right? It's good problems.
It's good problems.
They have a lot of really talented players.
God, I don't even know who's running the foot because P. Ryan's gone.
Yeah, Joe Mixon's still there.
Is still a cut candidate.
Yeah.
But then when you get Brown, this is we talked a lot about the Bengals rushing attack last year and how they've become more diverse. The prior year was almost entirely a zone-based running team. Last year, you saw more gap runs, and I do wonder if Brown will sort of move them further in that direction because of his blocking style.
Yeah. I hate to devalue the spot. They can find a running back if that's what it takes.
Yeah.
Right? Like they just like look at the teams now, like the Chiefs are at the top of the heap, and I would be surprised if the Chiefs spend significantly at running back anytime soon. Like they just know how to play the margins. And that's an important thing when you have a ton of players that are very, very good and very, very, very well compensated as a result of being that good.
It's a great running back draft too.
Yeah.
Great draft. Very deep. Okay, another team I want to talk about that you and I have, I feel like we...
Come on in.
We planted our flag.
Everybody welcome. Let's go.
We are the duo that famously said Texans are doing all right once.
Yeah. Got some newspaper.
So we are one of the few duos that follow this team, although that's going to change a lot now that, when they get a young quarterback. No, but I just want to talk about them briefly because they really made a lot of changes. And they're interesting because they're a team that went into free agency with a fair amount of cap space, but they didn't make any big splurges. It was a lot of nobody really made splurges as we discussed, but they added a bunch of solid
deals. Yeah.
A lot of solid players. Just to list some of the more notable ones. This was actually they added Robert Woods before, I think, at the very, very beginning of all of this, which ended up being, I mean, I think it was 2 years, $15 million. It's, whatever, but
reasonable.
So then they add, notably, D'Amico Ryans, Jimmy Ward, who knows from San Francisco, bringing some stability to that secondary, pairing with Jalen Petrie, player I really like. Sheldon Rankins. That flew under the radar. Love that signing. I thought he was awesome last year.
He bounced back so well off the Achilles. He's been great.
Trade for Shaq Mason. Very, again, competent solid guard. Tampa didn't give up a lot for him. And then near the end, added the aforementioned Devin Singletary and Dalton Schultz. All of which to say, you're going to turn on Texans football this year and see players you've heard of.
Yeah.
Which is a new experience.
Nice change, right? Yeah.
And these are the length of the deals is kind of all over the place. But they're definitely more known quantities than previous years. How do you feel about them, some of these moves in aggregate? Are there any of them that jump out to you as being, particularly noteworthy?
So I want to do 30 seconds on just why. So let's go back through the tenure of Nick Caserio as the GM so far. And I understand that people are going to categorize his tenure based off the fact that they've now hired 3 coaches in 3 years. I understand that. Just strictly, I think you and I have focused in on just what has he done in building a roster, which is his primary responsibility as the GM and his staff, right? The first year they have no cap space because of what happened before that, and they had no draft picks, right? They traded all those picks. The next year was last year, and they navigated, obviously, the Deshaun Watson situation, which lasted into free agency. They ended up recouping some draft capital as a result of that, but they had very limited cap space, once again, with a sizable dead money hit on the books for Deshaun Watson. Let's look at the players that they have actually drafted using premium picks and what the future might look like for them. Derek Stingley is going to be really good, 3rd overall pick last year. In Lovie Smith's system, frankly, you can get much more out of Derek Stingley in a different system than a guy who was playing. Lovie Smith likes to play, which is a ton of Tampa too. Kenyon Green, we'll see, first-year player, had concussion issues. Okay, but it's going to be I'm not ready to write that player off, right?
I didn't mention that they extended Laremy Tunsil.
Yep, that helps. But so they in the second round they end up landing Jalen Petrie, who you mentioned earlier, Damian Pierce. They had some dudes who ended up playing really well over these past 2 years in the draft class. Now this year, a little bit more cap space, and they were responsible. So I thought that maybe the most telling thing was, of all those deals that you mentioned, some vary in length, but they preserve their cards going forward. A lot of one-year deals as well. Dalton Schultz, Devin Singletary, Sheldon Rankins, amongst the guys added on just one-year contracts. And why I think that's important and telling is that if they hit with this quarterback this year, and let's just, whoever it is, it's probably Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, that player has some pieces in place around him to be, equipped for some success. Right? An offensive line that's got 2 very good tackles and some legitimate investments in the interior of the offensive line, now has some more capable pass catchers, but they haven't compromised anything going forward. They have not cast their die on what this roster is going to look like, because you're going to, A, have a ton more picks to continue to work with over the next few years, and B, if you have a young quarterback who's good, it's going to make playing in Houston more attractive than it has been over the past couple of years, where your leverage for the Texans was probably just you have a chance to play a lot here, right? If Bryce Young is a star right away, guys are going to want to come to Houston, and they're going to have a lot more ambition and ability to be aggressive in future year spending. So I know that it's going to matter more when they start winning and when a coach sticks around for a while, but I still, I'm a process-oriented person, and I generally think that the process has been pretty sound in Houston.
What if they traded for DeAndre Hopkins? That was the player that I was thinking of at the end of the first. Okay. I guess he would never go back. Yeah, no, that's
not gonna happen.
It would never happen. Okay, so I'm looking at the depth chart right now. So just trying to visualize what is the situation that the young quarterback is walking into. You kind of named all the players, but just taking a step back, you're looking at Nico Collins, Noah Brown, Robert Wood. Noah Brown, who was the second most productive wide receiver for Dallas last year. Robert Woods. Is Mechie coming back this year, or hopefully?
Mina, I'm just going to sit here and say I hope.
Hope so, yeah.
The reports continue to be very encouraging, but That's a player I liked a lot in the draft.
I like who loves John Mechie, by the way? Bryce Young. I remember when I met him.
Yeah.
He would not stop talking about how much he loves throwing to John Mechie. So that would be cool.
Yeah.
Anyways, but then Dalton Schultz, and then you mentioned Damian Pierce. Offensive line is decent. Honestly, it's a decent offensive line. Altogether, not a bad situation for a young quarterback to walk into. Could be so much worse. And then, I think I really liked, again, these kind of moves on the margins, Rankins, Ward, combining with the young players. I trust DeMeco Ryans on that side of the ball. Yeah. I just think he's going to, get, like you said, more out of some of the young players in the secondary in particular. I do think DeMeco Ryans would probably very much like to have like a Fred Warner. There's no, linebacker still kind of jumps out looking at this team. I mean, the whole front still needs work. But as far as like the young quarterback situations you walk into, it doesn't feel like that young quarterback would be walking in like he's not David Carr.
Not only that, Mina, but I think one thing we've probably realized over the past couple of years, and we should emphasize more. I should emphasize this more and more as I think about my own context going forward. Do you believe in the offensive infrastructure around him? Do you believe in the offensive court? Because if we learned one thing over the past couple of years is that like having good pieces does not equate to a quarterback all of a sudden becoming an ascendant player, right? I mean, I don't know that anybody like look at two players in the 2021 draft class who went this way and then that way in Mac Jones, and then this way and then that way. I'm using my hands here to describe down and then up for Justin Fields, and like things changed, right? Like, Justin Fields had a much more capable offensive staff. I know that they were still bereft of weapons last year, but they had a better plan in place than they did in year two, than they did in year one. Mac Jones, the opposite, right? Yeah. I mean, I was optimistic on Mac Jones during our quarterback draft last year, and now I'm like, oh my God, right? But
it just goes to you should really be drafting situations half the time with these quarterbacks.
And so with these Texans, like I know it's a first-time coordinator, Bobby Slowick, but
from San Francisco,
they brought along some veteran coaches. Yep, and that Shanahan tree has translated well elsewhere around the NFL.
I honestly like all of the situations for the young quarterbacks. I like. We're gonna talk about this in depth later, right? Okay, so the Panthers need weapons, but as I allude, I like the offensive line. I like Frank Reich. I think that's the assistants they have in place there. I like it. We're talking about Houston. Again, a lot to like about what they're putting in place to support the young quarterback. Indianapolis, there's some issues there, but Shane Steichen, I think we both agree, feels like a coach who has the capacity to shepherd and adapt his offense to a young quarterback. Who would be the next team to take quarterback?
I guess, would it be Seattle, Detroit, Las Vegas?
Oh, but those are the three we know they're going to take a quarterback teams, and they're all fine. It really feels... Yeah. None of them are, it's not a young quarterback walking into San Francisco, but they're good enough. There's enough there, especially the most important thing is the offensive lines. And these are all they've got some good players. And the fact that the Shaq Mason trade could end up being sneaky, the most important thing that the Texans did this offseason. Yeah. If he plays to his ability. So just to kind of take a step back from the Texans, there's still a lot of work to be done. This is an incomplete roster, but they added a lot of players that I like. And I think most importantly, it doesn't feel like whatever quarterback is entering this team is going to be set up to fail.
Not a hornet's nest he's walking into. I don't know. I just honestly, I enjoy these conversations about teams that aren't on the radar, Mina, because so much of what you and I do when we're on NFL Live, which of course you're on every single day, gravitates for obvious reasons
towards... You can start with the Cowboys field.
Yeah, but we know it's a show that is driven by ratings, right? You have to have people watching the show, and the Cowboys candidly draw more interest than teams that aren't right now at the top of the totem pole. And so I enjoy these conversations about teams that don't get nearly as much pub as I love a world in which we split the pie up evenly 32 ways. That's never going to be the case, but these teams go they're wretched until they're not, right? And when they're not, every once in a while it's nice to be we told you.
We're going to talk about the Jags so much next year. Just jagging it constantly.
Yeah.
And the Jets. Oh my God, we're gonna talk about the Jets so much.
Yeah, we
so
are.
much Jets
Uh-huh.
talk.
Yeah, we are.
Okay, well, actually, this brings to me the last thing before we get to Dinks and Dunks. I asked you to identify like a move that you liked that, you know, maybe a little under the radar. You alluded to the one that I'm going to talk about. It's a team that I have not talked about at all, and that's the Steelers, who had a pretty quiet offseason, signing Isaac Seumalo, you mentioned, the guard out of Philadelphia, who I think most people probably thought would be the best guard available in free agency. 3 years, $24 million, cheaper than, say, the Bears signing Nate Davis. I wouldn't have guessed that, frankly. You know, Seumalo's, when you come from Philadelphia, I think you obviously have the advantage of playing next to Jason Kelsey on one side, you know, Lane Johnson on the other, he's on the right side, yeah.
That's correct. Yep.
So, you know, that probably impacts perception of him. But what I like about this is, and this kind of connects to the discussion we had, you know, they wanted to help Kenny Pickett. Now, it's a little bit weird that they also signed Nate Herbig, who's another guard, but I'm just talking about the individual signing. I think
Herbig was a nice depth.
Yeah. For me, though, it's just like, you know, shoring up a unit that has quietly improved under the radar after being kind of a train wreck during the end of Ben Roethlisberger's career. Wouldn't be surprised if they even draft a tackle this year. But I like the focus on pass protection in particular and run blocking in Pittsburgh.
Yeah. So, by the way, Seumalo is an interesting one because it's like, you know, when these quarterbacks who throw for 5,000 yards in college go to the pros and they get drafted in the 7th round, you're like, how does that guy not go higher? It's like, oh, because his wide receiver on one side was like the number one player in the country last year, and his wide receiver on the other side was the number one player in the country from the year before. All 5 of his linemen are getting drafted, right? Like, it's going to be what happens with Stetson Bennett this year, right? He's not going to get drafted in the 1st round, maybe more like a day 3 pick. How is that possible for a guy who won back-to-back national championships? Well, he played with like the best team ever. So I'm going to say like I don't know how under the radar this is. We sort of referenced it a little bit before, but like I thought that we talked about Josh Oliver. Didn't necessarily love that signing there, but I thought that a lot of teams got some good deals on the tight end market for like below what you expect them to make, right? Robert Tonyan from the Bears. I think the base value is $2.65 million, which a guy, just a really solid football player, better probably as a pass catcher than a blocker, but he'll help in Chicago quite a bit. I thought that Dalton Schultz, we just referenced, was solid, $6.25 million.
Yeah, the value there.
Up to $9 million.
Definitely thought he would make more. If you'd asked me midpoint during the season,
And then Mike Gesicki, 1 year, $4.5 million, up to $9 million.
Wow.
And Mike Gesicki, he's a big receiver. He's an oversized slot receiver. It's just a fact. If you look at the number of snaps he played in line over the past couple of years, it's like very, very few, right? If he got it, he's got really unique skill set. I mean, as far as like catch radius is concerned, how many players have a bigger catch radius in the NFL right now than Mike Gesicki? I'm hard
Bill
pressed
O'Brien
to think of
will find
not many, right?
That to me is a good marriage of coach and signing, and it definitely fills a need for, especially obviously with the trading of Johnny Smith. They kind of never really, figured out how to use in that offense. It made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, so I thought just across the board, or not across the board because there were a couple others, but like those are 3 tight end signings that I thought were like reasonable and incur very little risk, right? Like they're probably going to be close to worth what you paid them, and I'm assuming, I haven't seen the language in them, but I'm assuming that if Mike Gesicki and Dalton Schultz hit the maximum incentives, that they're going to be doing very, very well for themselves. Like the team will feel very good about that. Like it'll be like, okay, that was an investment. We're glad. For those that don't know, this is again cap nerdum, but like when you have an incentive, the way it's structured is like, let's say your incentive is for, if you have 70 catches this year, you make $250K. If you have 80 catches, you make an additional $250K. 90 catches, again, all the way through. If you only had 65 catches the prior year, it would be considered not likely to be earned. So it's not going to count against your cap. If the Patriots or the Texans or the Bears have to pay the incentives and it's debited from your 2023 cap space, they're fine with that. They'll be happy with that because it means they got a killer investment in those 3 players.
We like a lot of these deals. Field and I are just handing out A's. Okay. Yeah. Lenny does not hand out A's. So we come back. 5 questions, 4 from me, 1 from Lenny.
And now it's time for Dinks and Dunks. I'm getting paid for this, right?
Okay. A lot of my questions are going to be about players still out there. Field and I are recording this on Tuesday afternoon. By the time you listen to this, something might have happened. This might be moot. That's why I'm doing it at the end. Sorry, you can laugh about how wrong we were. Yeah, first question is about the guy who's probably the amount of time spent talking to him relative to what we've seen on the field over the last few years might be the most disproportionate ratio in football, and that is one Odell Beckham Jr., who has not played football in quite some time, but has drawn a lot of interest, which is notable. I think, teams are legitimately taking a look at OBJ. OBJ shot down reports that he wants $20 million. He did say he wants more than $4 million. Field, let me ask you this. I'm not going to ask you who's going to sign him or to make a guess here. I'm going to ask you what you think would be the best situation for OBJ as a football player at this point.
1-year deal, base value that's like $7 or $8 million with the chance to make a whole lot more than that, Mina. Circumstances obviously dictate a lot of these things, but Michael Thomas signed a contract with the Saints for $6.25 million, which
That's
is basically
the contract
just
I was thinking of. So similar.
Just to be there. If you stay healthy, if Michael Thomas plays in every game this season, he'll make $10 million. If he balls out, he'll make $15 million. That's the deal that it'd probably a higher base value for OBJ, but that's the deal that I'd be looking for right now because I don't want to get tethered to a multi-year contract at like $12 million a year, right? Because peak OBJ is worth more than that. But I also know that I got to prove to teams that player still exists.
Bills.
I could see it. Totally.
Bills.
Cap, they got to figure out the cap. But
Bills. They did restructure Diggs' contract, which cleared up a little bit of space.
If
it's what you described, it's totally doable. If it's what you described. Now, I understand that if he wants more, it's cost prohibitive for Buffalo.
Right. And he may think that's an insulting suggestion that we just put out there. I'm just trying to, again, it's like real estate. You got to use comps, right? And relative to other players in the marketplace right now who have been paid, what can you reasonably expect for him?
Okay. Question 2. Trio of pass rushers. Leonard Floyd, Frank Clark, Yannick Ngakoue. Mm-hmm. If you were a team, which of those 3 players would you want?
So first of all, I think there's a chance that a couple of them might just say I'm chilling for a while, right? What's the value in me going and signing somewhere right now when I could probably latch on with a team much later on in the offseason? I think the answer is probably Yannick Ngakoue. I have to check. He's the youngest of those 3.
He's definitely the youngest, yeah.
He is, yeah. They probably have, in some ways, these players have a common thread, which is they're splash play type players, right? Yannick Ngakoue is not going to, every single down, totally disrupt an offense, but he might have 8.5, 9, 10 sacks per year, right? And 4 or 5 forced fumbles in a good year. Frank Clark has played incredibly well in big moments, playing for the Chiefs, but up until the playoffs, it was always what are we getting out of Frank Clark? And Leonard Floyd, he was exceptional at moments for the Rams. And we're talking about this Isaac Seumalo. Think about it the inverse way. How much of that is because you're getting you're playing next to Aaron Donald, who's drawing a double team every play. It's like getting open shots in the NBA. Not all not everybody who shoots 42%. I know. But there was, they were so tethered to that core. I think Yannick Ngakoue probably is the one that comes to mind for me.
I think Ngakoue is on the right team, as pass rush depth, super valuable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
because he will get to the quarterback. He's got speed still. He will not stop the run. But on the right team, if you add him into the mix, I don't have a team in mind. I didn't think this through.
No, I don't have a friend.
I really like it as a signing. But again, I don't think you want to give him a big contract as that sort of every down guy.
They could all be icing on the cake guys too, right? We get
There's a lot of that going around.
That could be last move we make or last big move we make before we get to the draft season.
Okay, question 3. I don't know if you saw this tweet. The gambling.com most angriest fan bases based on negative Facebook, Twitter, and Reddit posts. They ranked them. Did you see this?
I did not, but was it a tie between all 32 of them?
Yeah, right. I want you to try to guess
Okay.
2 of the top 5 angriest online fan bases since, not all of all time, since NFL free agency began. So basically this offseason.
Oh, this offseason.
Yeah. One of these makes a lot of sense.
Okay, 2 of the top 5 since free agency began. Eagles, because they lose all those players.
No, they're 10.
Okay.
They're 10th. So they're up there.
All right. Cowboys fans because they haven't got OBJ.
They're other 12th.
Okay, geez, I am way off.
Think about it. If you were, which team, if you were a fan of, would you be very anxious right now?
Packers are a very anxious group.
Really not. They're average.
Okay, geez, I am totally
I
missing
think
the boat.
they're kind of done.
Bills?
Field. If you're a fan of a team with a particular quarterback who might...
Jets fans? Are they number 1?
No.
Oh my gosh.
The Baltimore Ravens.
Oh god. Oh my god. Brain fart. Can we rewind and start this conversation?
Number 1 is kind of funny because number 1 it's the Minnesota Vikings. I guess maybe they haven't done enough.
Yeah, well, they kind of
maybe
reshuffled
that's
the deck, and there was
but they didn't really have a lot of room to maneuver. I don't know what they expected.
They are walking a very interesting line right now.
I liked how they approached the Kirk Cousins contract.
Yeah, no problem with that. Yeah, no, I'm with you. Yeah.
The happiest fan base, and this makes total sense. No, the Bears are happy. They're in the top 10.
Okay.
The Jacksonville Jaguars. Calvin Ridley's reinstated.
Yeah, we didn't sign any bad deals. We didn't sign any deals. Yeah.
That definitely checks out. They are. I was surprised. The Colts are 31st, which I thought Colts fans would be angry because they got leapfrogged in the draft.
Inactivity. I don't know. So who are the top 5?
Happiest or angriest?
Angriest. Yeah, who cares about the happy ones?
The Vikings, the Bengals, maybe that's before the Brown. I think seeing guys walk out the door.
Totally.
The Ravens, we discussed. The Lions, that I don't understand.
Nor do I.
This is a very imperfect science. And then the Panthers, maybe there's just a lot of division about DJ Moore leaving.
Yeah, totally.
Felt like they gave up too much. I actually liked it for.
Yeah, that was justified.
The Giants.
For the players they
I mean, it's divisive. I think when you do something that's divisive, there's good and bad, probably.
Yeah, for sure is.
Jones stuff.
Totally.
So,
yep.
Anyways, I talked about how much I loved the Waller trade for them. Okay, question 4, as we near the end. Okay, so I joked about the Texans and Hopkins. I have no freaking idea what's going to happen with that dude. I mean, just what are you hearing? What are you feeling? He's got to be traded, right? Let's start there.
I believe so, yes. I want fans to brace for a much more modest package than anybody would expect, Mina.
Yeah.
And I think that it's sort of incumbent upon us to go back and really study DeAndre Hopkins and what level player he is right now. Because I think the price tag is going to be a lot more modest than people realize. And I think the number of legitimate suitors is smaller than people realize as well. And, Mina, there have been times in recent years where football Twitter and the media has been all over a player, and the interest has been so lukewarm around the league. And the league has been right. The most glaring example over the past few years is Julio Jones, who was burnt toast when he got traded from Atlanta, and we all thought Tennessee stole him for a second or whatever it was. A second and a 4 or something. And by the way, there have also been times where the league has gotten it wrong, right?
Yes.
But that's what I'm studying really closely right now is what is the real market for DeAndre Hopkins?
Man, I just think because of his skill set, he's still so useful.
Yeah. At the right price tag, I think so, for sure.
But yeah, price tag is everything. And what is this? How expensive is he this year?
The contract will definitely be adjusted, but it's 2 years and $36 million right now. That'll be adjusted.
But Arizona, you got to be in tank mode. Eat some of that. Get that pick. That team's...
They've barely signed anybody to deals so far this offseason. It's been very
they
quiet.
know the score. They know what they're doing there this year.
Smart.
I think.
Yep.
David, who is their number 2 corp? Who's starting?
Colt McCoy and David Blau currently
they didn't
on the
sign
roster.
it. Yeah.
David Blau was re-signed to a 2-year deal. So
they didn't even sign Jacoby Brissett, y'all. That is.
I thought Josh Dobbs would end up there, but didn't end up happening.
Yeah.
His old QB coach is now Drew Pensick is the new offensive coordinator in Arizona.
What if Arizona's in position to draft Caleb Williams?
Ooh boy.
Okay, that's a whole other
What was
ball
it?
wax.
They've never pivoted off of a first-round quarterback, have they?
Well, they just got a tweet. Kyler is our guy.
Yeah,
and we'll
then we'll know
that,
for a fact.
he's
Yeah,
not going
tank is on.
Okay, last question, as always, comes from Lenny. Lenny noticed that yesterday you tweeted that the Broncos have waived DB Lamar Jackson. At CODCROS10 wrote, "You're the worst, Field."
Yeah.
Lenny wants to know if you'd care to reply.
I am the worst. That's okay. No, you know something, Mina? I thought about it because
You did write DB.
every once in a while, it's okay to have a little bit of fun
No.
on the old Bird app.
No fun.
But I think it's a little bit of a fine line. And I thought about it, and I said, you know what? Let the internet make its own jokes. I'm just putting the fact out there because it's accurate. The Broncos did, in fact, waive a defensive back named Lamar Jackson. Did I rile some people up? Maybe. Do I regret it? A tiny bit. But it got some hilarious replies, and I thought for the most part it was generally harmless.
Just let Field have fun.
Every once in a
Let
while,
Field
people.
let
I
Field
try
have
to
his fun.
keep it, fairly businesslike for the most part, but every once in a while,
All right. Well, you are always allowed to have fun on the Mina Kimes Show featuring Lenny, Field Yates. Thank you, as always,
Thank you.
coming on. And the rest of you guys, see you next week.
Wow.